A very warm good morning to one and all present here. My name is Nouria Siddiqui. It's an absolute honor to welcome you all to another insightful session organized by Department of English. Literature has always been a mirror to society, capturing the essence of its time. And today we have the privilege of diving into one of the most fascinating period in British poetry, that is 17th and 18th century. To guide us through this important period, we have with us an esteemed scholar, Miss Angela Qureshi. She is a research scholar at Jharkhand City University, Bhopal, and has demonstrated academic excellence by qualifying SET in 2022 and NET in 2024. Her deep engagement with literature make her the perfect speaker for today's session. We welcome you, ma'am.
Today we're going to encapsulate 17th and 18th century British poetry. Yeah. So 17th century British poetry. 17th century was a period of dramatic change in England. So as you know, as students of English literature, it's very important for us to take into consideration what's going on around us in the society. And that is what is reflected in the literature as well. So history needs to be incorporated, the society needs to be incorporated, and of course political turmoil or political changes also need to be talked about when taking into consideration the literature of a particular time. So this was the time in England when there was a lot of dramatic change. Right, it was England was shaped by political turmoil because there was English civil war going on, right, from 1642 to 1651. And of course, one of the major events of that time was the execution of King Charles I, which was in 1649. So I've highlighted important things in yellow so that you could make kind of like MCQs for your UGC net, because these are the kinds of questions that could be asked, right? So for example, this one in particular, the execution of King Charles I in 1649 was very, very important. So, and of course, eventual rise of the Commonwealth under Oliver Cromwell, again, a very important parliamentarian. So this was going on in 17th century in Britain. And of course, because of all the political and social turmoil, we could see the changes and the transition, the drift in the literature of that time as well. Now, these changes had a profound impact, had a deep impact on British poetry, of course. The period is marked by diverse poetic styles, including metaphysical poetry. Now, if one of you could tell me what you understand by metaphysical poetry. Are you aware of that term as yet?
It was a kind of poetry that went beyond physical things or physical elements. Like it went to the supernatural elements and related to spirituality. These kind of elements were used in this poetry.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that, Juveria. All right. So metaphysical basically means beyond the realm of physicality, talking about spiritual stuff and the stuff that is beyond the tangible. Right. Now, if you could enlighten me along the lines of Cavalier poetry. Are you aware of that?
I don't know the exact term for it, but it means the glorification of the monarchy and maybe a celebration of life and love.
Yeah, kind of. So basically, one of the hints that I could give you through this is that Cavalier starts with C, right? So that's how you remember that Cavalier poets were the poets that glorified the kingdom of King Charles I, right? So from Cavalier, you come to Charles, right? That's how you do. And of course, early beginnings of Restoration and Augustan poetry. Okay, moving forward. So key events, super important. If you're preparing for UGC NET, please start focusing on the chronology of events and dates right from the start, because the trend as of now is such that a vast majority of questions are asked from chronology of things, right? Chronology of important events in English literature, chronology of poets and their works, and so on and so forth. So right from the start, please make sure that you're very well aware of the chronology of events. right? If you were to go through the patterns and the trends in the former question papers, you would come across a lot of questions that have been asked along the similar lines. And of course, I do understand that initially it's hard, but then with revision and practice, it does get better. So please make sure that you are well aware of the events and the chronology of events as such. All right, so key events shaping 17th century British poetry. 1642, we have the English Civil War. Then 1649, super important, execution of King Charles the First, right? Because the second one is also important later on. So this is the execution of King Charles the First. And 1650 is, of course, rise of the Commonwealth under Oliver Cromwell. Now, what basically is metaphysical poetry? So, of course, for UGC NET, please make sure that you're well aware of the metaphysical poets, because this is one of the recurrent questions in UGC NET. So, metaphysical poets were known for their intellectual and complex verse combining wit. All right, are you aware of wit? All right, so wit basically is humor or sarcasm plus intelligence, right? So there are intelligent jokes and intelligent sarcasm, intelligent humor, right? So when we're talking about metaphysical poetry, it incorporates intellectual and complex verse. It combines wit, irony, and of course, if there's a focus on philosophical aspects of life and death, which could be seen through their metaphysical conceits. Now, conceits are super important. And this could be one of the tricks through which you can make out that a particular piece of poetry is metaphysical in nature, right? So what basic, and we have key poets here. So John Donne is super important. Make sure that you go through his works in detail. George Herbert is important. Andrew Marvell again is important. Richard Crashaw. So all of them are super important and they are metaphysical poets. And metaphysical conceits, what are they? Basically, they are extended metaphors that make complex or intricate comparisons between things. So if you go through his works, John Donne's works in particular, you would come across weird, supernatural, kind of beyond the realm of physicality metaphors. So those are called metaphysical conceits. Now, of course, one of the major characteristics of metaphysical poetry is the emotional depth as well, because there's a lot of exploration going on of love, death, and spirituality. So again, these are the recurrent themes in metaphysical poetry. Philosophical themes as well, meditations on the nature of existence, faith, and morality. Some of the examples could be John Donne's The Flea, A Valediction, Forbidden Mooring, Andrew Marvell's To His Coy Mistress. So these are some of the prominent works of metaphysical poetry. Are you able to follow so far? Is the pace good for you?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Thank you for that. Now, here's some fancy graphics for you to understand. Yeah. So the intellectual and emotional depth of metaphysical poetry. So yeah, there was a lot of physical exploration that was going on, combined with intellectual complexity and of course emotional depth. Now we have another important hallmark of 17th century, which was Cavalier poetry. So as I said, C for Cavalier, C for Charles, right? So King Charles the First, again, I'm just emphasizing because as I mentioned earlier, King Charles II becomes important later on, super important. All right, so the Cavalier poets were royalist poets who wrote during the English Civil War, often supporting King Charles I. So basically the supporters of King Charles I were called Cavalier poets. And who were those? Again, this bunch is super important, could make a good question for UGC NET. Robert Herrick, Richard Lovelace, and Sir John Suckling. Now, hallmarks or characteristics or traits of Cavalier poetry. You see this term called carpe diem. Perhaps some of you might be aware. Could you enlighten me what this could mean? Carpe diem. Have you heard this phrase before? Yes, sure.
ma'am.
What does it mean?
I think it's a French phrase which means seize the day,
Yeah.
like generally speaking. Yeah.
So carpe diem, for those of you who don't understand, is a term which basically means seize the day, which when extended basically means that make the most of life. All right. which of course is one of the dominant traits of the romantic poetry as well. Those poets, romantic poets in England, basically enjoyed life so much as opposed to classic writers who were focused on conventions or rules and regulations, right? So here also we have Cavalier poets who believed in this term called carpe diem, which means making the most of life, focusing on the fleeting nature of life and importance of enjoying it while it lasts. So of course, everyone is well aware of the inevitability of death, that it is bound to come and we need to make the most of it. And that is their philosophy, and that was reflected in their literature as well. So they believed in enjoying life while it lasted. Then, of course, there were a lot of light-hearted themes that were going on, nothing dark, nothing heavy, nothing dense. So they talked about love, beauty, pleasure, truth, etc. And their writing style was majorly formal. And of course, there was a lot of lyrics that were written during that time. So lyrics basically would mean poetry that could be sung. All right, so examples would be Robert Herrick's To the Virgins, To Make Much of Time, and Richard Lovelace, To Lucasta, Going to the Wars. Now, Restoration poets, late 17th century, super important. So after the monarchy was restored in 1660. All right. So this again is very, very important. Question could be asked, when was the monarchy restored in England? So this was in 1660. So poets now, after the execution of King Charles I, monarchy was restored in 1660. And of course, it was politically turbulent times, and of course that was also reflected in the nature of people and literature at that point of time. So this began to be the time when people began to embrace a more classical style and focus on reason, clarity, and order, right, as opposed to loving life as such. So there was a major shift here. And Restoration poets or poetry focused more on classical style. They focused more on reason, rationality, clarity, order. Major poets were John Dryden, Andrew Marvell, Thomas Shadwell. All right. Now, what were the hallmarks of that period? So neoclassical influence, again, super important, because they had begun to borrow from the classical Greek and Roman literature. So there was a revival in the sense that they were not coming up with their own literature. They were borrowing basically from classical Greek and Roman literature, and hence the revival of neoclassical influence. So poets emphasized formality and rational thought, super important. And of course, political satire was being written because obviously the political turmoil, turbulence, conflict was going on. So that was reflected in the literature through satire. Satire basically is kind of critique, so to say. So it became a popular genre. And examples would be John Dryden's Absalom and Achitophel, Thomas Shadwell's The Virtuoso, so on and so forth. Then we have 18th century British poetry. The 18th century is often referred to as the Age of Enlightenment or the Augustan Age. Makes for a good net question or set. Set although is easier, but again, these are some of the important topics that you need to take into account. So 18th century was also called the Age of Enlightenment or the Augustan Age, characterized by focus on reason, order, clarity, classicism. So basically classic ideals of harmony and restraint. The period also saw the rise of satire and a growing interest in the human condition. So a lot of poets, writers, prose writers were basically talking about the human condition of the period. Of course, a lot of things were being written on social issues, and there was exploration of nature and society in general as well. So key poetic movements and poets. All right, so Augustan poetry. This period was named after the reign of Augustus Caesar. So Augustan comes from Augustus, and Augustus Caesar in particular, during which there was a revival. So revival basically means rebirth, so to say, or coming back of classical forms and ideals that were the case in the ancient times. The poets of this era sought to emulate or kind of imitate the works of classical writers like Homer and Virgil. So Homer and Virgil existed eons ago, right? And this was the time when they were being kind of imitated yet again during the Augustan period. And the key poets of Augustan age were Alexander Pope, Jonathan Swift, John Dryden, Lady Montagu. So all of them were major poets. Now, characteristics of Augustan poetry would incorporate satire, so a sharp critique of society, politics, and human nature, because that's what was going on in the society at that point of time. Use of heroic couplets, rhymed, and heroic couplets are basically rhymed pairs of iambic pentameter. And of course, there was a lot of focus on reason and the limitation of human behavior. Some of the examples could be Alexander Pope's The Rape of the Lock, the Dunciad. Probably you might be aware of The Rape of the Lock. It's quite famous and you might have studied it by now. Yeah. Okay. So now there was another important trait that was happening during this time, another important event or occurrence, so to say, that there was a rise in novel. Right, though not strictly poetry, the 18th century saw the rise of the English novel. So basically, when it all started with oral tales, right? People kind of performed the drama, and women were not allowed when it all started. So men had to play the characters of women, and a lot of people would get together for the sake of entertainment, and there would be open theaters in Greece and Rome, and majorly men will perform all the characters and drama, and people would enjoy it. And later, and of course, so there was the oral tradition of literature. And later on, people had begun to experiment with the invention of printing press and media and awareness and educational levels and advancement. People had shifted to written literature. Print media was kind of taking over the world. And of course, there was a prominent culture called the coffee culture, where people would get together and recite poetry and talk literature. And of course, then it shifted to performing arts, theaters, and theaters were eventually closed down because of the political turmoil, because of radicalism in the society as well. And later on, theaters were again opened. And then, of course, people were experimenting with different genres. So there were some people who liked poetry. Then, of course, there was verse. And of course, eventually there was the rise of novel as well, because it was fun to read, it was a great escape, it was easily available. So, and of course, by now in the contemporary society, we have all the adaptations, we have memes, we have podcasts. So the formats have changed, but basically the language, so to say, of literature remains the same. All right. So, of course, at that point of time, there was a rise of novel, which in turn influenced the poetic works of the time too. Novel's emphasis on character and plot impacted the development of poetic themes and forms. So, one of the major or stark contrasting differences or distinctions between poetry and novel is the length. And even if you talk about, let's say you have to write a critical essay for 500 words as opposed to writing, and you then have to write a critical essay for 3,000 words. Now, could you tell me which is going to be more difficult for you, 500 words or 3,000 words? I would like to hear your thoughts.
3,000 words.
Because?
Because, ma'am, it will take time, and it will include all our ideas. That's why.
Okay. Yes, that was a good one, Shobna.
Like the person just said, it'll be longer, but also to keep it like coherent, because it's easier to keep your ideas coherent like when the length is shorter. So I
Oh,
presume कि it'll be more
got
difficult to write a longer piece, which is also coherent, you know.
Okay, that's a good one. Yes, others, what are your thoughts? Please share your thoughts. 500 words or 3,000 words? Which, according to you, is more difficult?
I believe 500 words would be more difficult to write
Because
because while writing 500 words, we need to ensure that we're including all of the details that are necessary for whatever subject we're writing on, and also because it's difficult to catch the attention of the audience while also making sure that all of the details are included. So
amazing, very good. Yes. Do you have any more thoughts? So we have 35 people, and I'm the 36th one. So yes, please share your thoughts. Which, according to you, is more difficult, and what?
I think
Yes, please
I
go
think
ahead.
when you put such a small limit in
Yeah.
words, yeah, I was saying that as like when you just put a limit in words, that you just have a limit of 500 words, it becomes very complex to put everything you have to say in just that less amount of words. So I think 500 words is definitely more difficult.
Very good. Thank you for your input. Yes, so I completely agree with the last two speakers. 500 words is going to be more difficult because there's limited space. And by limited space, I mean, we don't have enough space to impress the reader, which also means that we need to be very, very careful with our word choice. We cannot write elaborate sentences, intricate sentences, because there's only limited space, and we need to be very particular, very meticulous when it comes to word choice. Like if you look at JNU, Delhi, right? So when they have their CFPs, which is called for papers, which basically means research conferences, they ask you to write a research abstract and send it to them, which is only for 300 words. Now, had I been given 1,000 words, so to say, although that doesn't happen, but this is just for reference and for your understanding. Had I been given 1,000 words, it would have given me enough space to impress them. Now, how do I communicate everything I want to say and be very particular and very expressive in just 3,000 words is such a task. And that's what they want to kind of get out of the person. So anyone who impresses them with merely 300 words is going to get an invitation for the research conference, right? And at the same time, word choice, super important, limited space. So you need to be very careful. You don't have the liberty to use elaborate sentences, intricate sentences. You need to be very to the point, right? And at the same time, having said that, there are challenges to 3,000 words as well, because you need to be again particular of the word choice, although it's more relaxed than 500 words or 300 words per se, but then you need to take into consideration that it becomes difficult to come up with 3,000 words on your own, right? And that's when you back it up with quotations and resources and extracts. So that is why any competition, for example, Harvard and Yale essays for high school students, they are about 500 words. And kids or writers in India per se have a habit of kind of beating around the bush and not sticking to the point, right? So how do you make sure that and of course the transition. So when you are talking about 3,000 words, you have enough paragraphs and enough space to focus on the transition and to kind of use words in a particular order so that the transition is seen, the coherence is seen, the flow is seen. But how do you do that in 300 or 500 words is a major challenge. And that is when you are tested through your word choice, through how tightly knit your paragraphs are, and your word choice and everything. Hence, I would say that 500 words are more difficult as opposed to 3,000 words. And of course, having said that, 3,000 words have challenges of their own, because you need to come up with perfect flow for that as well, perfect word choice for that as well, perfect content that is aligning with your particular premise. All right, so that was enough for the digression. Coming back to our second point of the rise of the novel. So then we have poets like James Thomson, the Seasons, and William Cowper, who began to explore nature and the personal in contrast to the formalism of earlier poetry. So there's a lot of sharp contrast that is going on. Then we have super important the elegiac and pastoral tradition. So yes, you might be aware of elegy and pastoral poetry. Could you just enlighten me? What are your thoughts about elegy? Yes, Shobna, please.
An elegy usually mourns speaking in the most broadest sense, it mourns the death of somebody, and I don't exactly remember, but I think it usually incorporates themes of like pastoral themes or like themes related to shepherd life and all of that. Not necessarily. For example, Tennyson wrote In Memoriam upon the death of his friend. So
Yeah.
I think that can be considered an elegy. Yes. Thank you.
Perfect. All right. Yeah, okay, great. So elegy and pastoral tradition. By the way, how many of your writers have you been maintaining journals or diaries as such? Are you guys writers? Anyone who's into diary writing or journal writing? Because it's quite therapeutic. Yes, all right, amazing. Okay, I hope if you're not writers, you're readers, because that is super important for our field. All right, the elegiac and pastoral tradition. So the 18th century continued the tradition of pastoral poetry, which means basically talking about the serenity, the greenery, the shepherd life, often with a more refined and occasionally ironic tone. Key poets were Thomson, Collins, Gray. Now the characteristics were nature and reflection. So I think one of the main reasons as to why we still study literature is the relevance and the connect. Because all of us have rough patches in our lives, and it is in those turbulent times that we turn to literature, that we turn to nature, that we turn to, I would say, going on walks or going to parks and things like that, right? And that is what our former poets and writers did too. They basically returned to nature. In fact, if you recall some of the prominent poets or writers in India as well, basically they live in, I think Ruskin Bond lives in Mussoorie, right? And so many of other writers as well, they basically have a very kind of introverted, reserved life, because that's what works for them, right? They basically believe in turning inwards, and that happens when there's a lot of peace and quiet and greenery and nature per se. And that is what happened to these writers as well. They turned to nature, and that's what helped them contemplate life. That's what helped them reflect, right? So poets often use nature to explore universal themes of life, death, and passage of time. Now, when you're surrounded in a natural setting, it gives you enough time to kind of ponder over the nature of life, the nature of death and mortality and faith and relationships and whatnot. And that's what these poets did as well. Then, of course, elegy was a common form during those times. So elegies are basically poems that mourn the dead, and they reflect on the mortality of human life as well. So Thomas Gray's elegy, written in a country churchyard, is super important. Please go through it in detail. Since we have a time crunch, I can't really explain everything, but I am hoping for more sessions in the future, hopefully in person. So yeah, let's see how that pans out. Now again, this was the time which was a romantic precursor to the times to come as well, right? So the later part of the 18th century set the stage for the romantic movement, right? And with poets beginning to explore more personal, emotional, and natural themes. So moving towards the romantic era, the romantic age, the romantic period in England, in particular, there had begun a shift, a paradigm shift in how poets were approaching literature. From classical rational thoughts and forms, they were turning to more personal, more inwardly, more, I would say, works that involve the senses. So Keats was the poet of the senses. This could again be a question for Net. So make sure that you know this by now. Other romantic writers also talked about things that were involving all the senses, right? And again, emotional things were being talked about, natural things were being talked about, though still grounded in Enlightenment ideals. So William Blake happens to be one of the bridges that kind of take us to the Romantic era or age as well. And Romantic precursor, basically the characteristics for that genre in particular is the focus on imagination as opposed to the reason and thought and rationality and order, right? And obviously, as you know, imagination does not have any bounds, and that's what attracted the Romantic poets. So that they got together and they started creating poetry. And Wordsworth, Coleridge, Southey were called the Lake poets. So Lake poets basically were poets from the Lake District of England, right? So yeah, Romantic poets. So of course there was a lot of focus on imagination that was going on, a departure from the strict rationalism of the Augustan period. So again, a shift, a transition, and they chose emotion over reason. So as opposed to choosing reason or rationality, they focused more on imagination and emotion. And that again was reflected in all the works. So if you recall all the odes that were written by the Romantic poets, you would come across words. So their word choice was pretty meticulous, right? So you would see that the ode writers were taking a single theme and kind of breaking it into multiple pieces, with each piece kind of meticulously crafted with particular word choice, and all the adjectives would basically give us so much detail about a single piece of nature, right? So that was reflected in their poetry. Now, let's recap the themes in 17th and 18th century poetry. So, love in human relationships, super important, explored in both the metaphysical and cavalier traditions, often dealing with the complexities of love, seduction, and romantic passion. Mortality in the afterlife, again, was one of the prominent hallmarks of that period, explored through metaphysical, cavalier, Augustan lenses, often focusing on the brevity of life and inevitability of death. So, brevity means how kind of little, how small life is, right? And inevitability means that something that is bound to come, for example, death. So there was a lot of focus that's going on. I hope by now you know what metaphysical, cavalier, and Augustan means. Political and social commentary was going on because of the conflicts that were going on during those times, especially prominent in the 18th century with the rise of satire. Poets critiqued societal norms, political corruption, and human folly. So human nature was also being talked about. Nature, again, from the pastoral elegance of earlier poetry to the more personal reflections on nature towards the end of the 18th century, nature became an important theme. Okay. So the 17th and 18th century in British poetry were marked by a diversity of styles and themes, from the intense intellectualism of metaphysical poets to the light-hearted and sensual verse of the cavaliers, and finally to the satirical and reasoned poetry of the Augustans. These periods laid the groundwork for the Romantic movement that would emerge in the 19th century with poets like William Blake. Now, could you also tell me other Romantic poets that you recall? Yes, please. Shobna.
Wordsworth, Keats, Shelley, Coleridge.
Perfect.
Romantic poets, right? Yeah.
Yes, amazing. Okay. And Could you guys tell me some of the characteristics of romantic poetry? Have you been exposed to romantic poetry as yet? Yes, Shobna.
Yes. Wordsworth said that he was to use the language of man. So now, instead of using very, sophisticated or elaborated language, I would not say not sophisticated, but the language of man, and a lot of focus on nature instead of it being about society and about satire.
Amazing.
Yes.
Perfect. Very good. Yes. Others. What were the other characteristics of romantic poetry?
Romantic poetry often used imagination, sometimes melancholy, supernaturalism, and aesthetic beauty, I guess.
Amazing. Very good. Perfect. Yes. Others, do you have anything more to add?
Also, on the emphasis of individualism.
Amazing. Yes, yes. Very good. Okay. Do you have any favorites when it comes to romantic poetry in general? For example, I personally like the odes. Yeah, Keats. I was also going to say that. Keats and um,
Also,
Byron.
Shelley's.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
Byron.
Shelley, Byron, all of them. I think all of them were really, really amazing. Okay. Yeah. So we had William Blake beginning to question the rationality of earlier ages and turning towards imagination, emotion, and individualism. Okay. So 17th century British poetry. Let's look at the key points and recap. So metaphysical poetry was complex, intellectual, combining wit and philosophical themes. There was a lot of yes, Sarah.
Ma'am, could you please show the previous slide?
Sure. And don't worry, I'll share the PPT with you guys on the group. Okay.
Okay, done, ma'am. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. Now, recapping everything what we learned. So focus on love, death, and spirituality, use of metaphysical conceits, also called extended metaphors, and emotional depth. So John Donne, super important, Herbert Marvell Croshaw. Then we have notable works. Cavalier poetry, Charles the First. Right? Carpe diem, seize the day, love, beauty, pleasure. So very light-hearted, lyrical in style with emphasis on enjoying life. Herrick, Lovelace, Suckling. So we have then the notable works and restoration poetry, very important. Emphasis on classical ideals and reasons after the monarchy was restored. 18th century British poetry focus on reason, order, classical ideals. Heavy use of satire to critique society, politics, and human nature. So Pope was important, Swift, Dryden, very, very important. The Rape of the Lock again is very important for UGC NET because, I recall in one of my former attempts at NET, there was a question that in Rape of the Lock by Alexander Pope, what was the name of the dog? Right? And talking about this particular attempt in particular, I had no idea what the name was. So obviously I couldn't do it then. I went home, checked the answer, and then I knew what the answer was. And the similar question was asked in MP set. Right? And by that time, I knew the answer. So I was able to I was able to mark the correct answer, which was Shock. The name of the dog was Shock. Right. So some questions from NET are repeated in set, and some questions from set are also repeated in NET. Focus on nature, mortality, and reflection. Please make sure that you're going through all the poets as well, because again, one of the prominent questions is that they will give you a bunch and they will ask you to identify whether the particular bunch is Augustan poets or say romantic poets or Victorian or whatever, right? So romantic precursor, early signs of romanticism emphasizing emotion, imagination, and okay. And of course, individuality. Now, common themes in 17th and 18th century: love and human relationships, mortality and the afterlife, political and social commentary, and nature and its role in reflecting human emotion and life. Okay, now this was all about the topic for today. Let me share the resources with you for UGC NET in general. Are you able to see the new slide, Romantic Age?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so this is the slide that I had shared on the group, the excellence group, because I had taken a lecture on this. I will reshare it again. And of course, you can go through the whole slide, but right now I'm just gonna take you to the resources for UGC NET, which is slide 20. Okay, all right. So the first link that you see entails the detailed course syllabus, right? And if you talk about my personal experience and recommendations, I do not prefer Vineet Pandey because he's not good enough, sorry to say. Arpita Karwa, although better than Vineet Pandey, but still not good enough for UGC NET. Of course, you can use her resources from the website, but her content is not too great. Dr. Kalyani Vallat is really amazing. I would personally recommend her. There's a course that she has on Udemy, although slightly steep, slightly expensive. I think the last I checked it was 8,000, but probably you could make a group of your friends and get it because the subscription is for a lifetime and the course content is just to die for. Really amazing, robust, because that is expected from a UGC NET aspirant. So please go through that. In case you like it, make sure that you get your hands on it. So yeah, the first link has Arpita Karwa's detailed course syllabus, because although her content is not too good, her resources on the website are pretty solid. So make sure that you're using her resources, and the course syllabus is really detailed, so that could act as a blueprint or a map or a kind of template for you to prepare all the topics, right? Then we have subject wise question. Limitless Literature is a really good resource. I think it's by Nakul sir, and it has subject wise questions. For example, they'll give questions on romantic literature, they'll give you questions on Victorian, so make sure that you go through that. Kalyani ma'am's course is really amazing. I personally have been using it, and well, it has worked wonders for me. It also has PDFs as well, so make sure that you go through it, and in case you like it, please feel free to buy it. Now again, Arpita Karwa solved papers, very important. It's on the website, so with answers, but of course you need to cross check because, well, sometimes there are mistakes, but of course make sure that you're going through all the question papers. Then yeah, so Amazon links for books that are a must buy. The first one is Beginning Theory. Absolutely amazing. You need to get your hands on that. You're going to enjoy reading it so much. It's Beginning Theory, and by Peter Barry. Second is Routledge History of English Literature. 5 stars. Amazing book. Very robust, very encapsulating. Please get your hands on that in case you really like a particular publication, because the Routledge is really good. Then we have Glossary of Literary Terms. M.H. Abrams is just a Bible for literature enthusiasts. Get your hands on that as well. Really amazing. And of course, if you don't want to buy, you can get from the libraries as well. So just all we need to do is read. Then we have, what else do we have? Concise History. So Indian, yeah. So this is where we make mistakes. Almost all of us are pretty good at literature, but almost all of us are not good at math. And this is where we lack in paper 1, right? So make sure that you're studying for paper 1 from day 1, because that is one of the kind of hurdles in us clearing the exam. So paper 1, one of the best resources and the only resource that I used was KVS Madan Very, very beautiful, amazing book, very robust. So make sure that you study through that as well. And of course, Indian English questions or literature are pretty recurrent nowadays. So make sure that you get your hands on that. I think this is Mehrotra, if I'm not wrong. Yeah. And what else? Yeah, critical history of English literature is also good. Linguistics ki, which one is this? I think this must be SIAL. So SIAL is really good for UGC NET or for linguistics in general as well. So these are some of the resources that I wanted to share with you. YouTube resources again. One of the things that worked for me was, since I get pretty bored easily, I would kind of change the format of studying. So sometimes I would study from books, sometimes I would make notes, sometimes I would write on my own, sometimes I would read on my own, sometimes I would use YouTube resources, sometimes I would use audio notes. So you could also do the same. YouTube resources are really, really amazing. NPTEL courses for theory and criticism, particularly by IIT professors. So what was the name of the lady? Simi, sorry. Yeah, I think her name is Simi Marin Raj, if I'm not wrong. And Dr. Sayantan Chattopadhyay, again, one of the best IIT professors when it comes to our field. So these are some of the NPTEL courses that you could go through. Very, very amazing. And of course, make sure that you're making notes. All right, so that was it from my side.